So there was a possibility that I was gonna have that kind of reaction and be like immediately, oh my god, I need to get this, I love the 1300, but this is so much better, blah blah blah. Alright, these are the Moguls, rollers, whatever they're supposed to be called. If you have an opinion on what they're colloquially called, tell me, because they're not really whoops. These are ones that do feel a little easier on this bike. And oh, cybertruck. But as you can see, this is fairly rocky. I can still reasonably sit with the suspension, with the seat. Kind of the most difficult parts of the trail. Here at the very end. Alright, this can be a little harder to get back up than going down. Should be fine though. There we go. The quick shifter is a lot smoother at low gears, right? So 1 to 2 and a little bit 2 to 3. Let's see. This is gonna be when I drop it. No. Well, that guy was going fast. Very carefully. Okay. Whew. All right.
Is that a KTM, you ask? Yes, it is. My 1300 GS is in the shop waiting for new wheels, and I'm trying out this KTM in the meantime. Specifically, it's a KTM 790 Adventure R from 2019. I'm going to spend a fair amount of time in the beginning of the ride here discussing the differences that I'm perceiving between the 1300 GS and the KTM based on my experience riding the trail the day before. I will be commenting a little bit on the differences throughout the ride, but most of the commentary is in the beginning here. I will try my best to mark KTM and GS comparisons in the chapter section, so you can jump to topics of interest with respect to comparisons. However, for this initial discussion, I'm not going to mark individual topics. There's just a whole comparison discussion that I'm going to mark as one chapter.
All right, so I'm back here at Maple Springs, this time on a KTM 790 Adventure R from 2019. I'm gonna use this paved section as an opportunity to discuss a little bit the differences between the 790 here and the 1300 GS, which I normally ride, from the perspective of myself. So I would call myself upper end of beginner, lower end of intermediate rider at this point. And of course you'll see in the video how I ride this trail. But what was interesting to me was, after having ridden the 1300 so much and getting used to it and starting to get like properly comfortable and no longer feel like a newbie for adventure biking off-road, what difference does a bike make that is much better for off-road? So of course there's nothing controversial, or like, it's pretty objective that like for off-roading, the 790 and the 890 that I still hope to try, but I didn't have an opportunity this weekend, is going to be better off-road obviously than the 1300 GS. And it's clear that is going to be true if you're a high-skilled rider riding hard, jumping it or whatever, or doing things like that. That's obviously going to be a difference, but it wasn't clear to me from my perspective, right? Would I notice a tangible, immediate difference? How much of a change would it be for me at my sort of lower riding skill, right? And I thought it might be interesting to other people who maybe are making decisions and maybe they're not in a position to try these off-road, because even if most dealers don't even have or I don't know about most, but many dealers, at least in my area, don't even give test rides, and even if they do, obviously you're not going off-road, so it is sometimes hard, right? So some observations so far. I'm gonna skip over the street stuff, aside from very briefly, it is really nice to be able to lane filter a little bit better, not having the boxer engine sticking out. But other than that, I actually really prefer personally the 1300 on the streets. In any case, so off-road. The short version for me is that in terms of my ability to ride how I want to ride and where I'm riding at the level that you're gonna see in this video, it doesn't make a large difference. There's a couple of places, I'll call it out when we get there. There's a place where I'm riding through some moguls or rollers, whatever you want to call them, kind of not whoops, but like sort of a similar situation, where I felt like it was tangibly smoother and easier on this bike. Although it's hard to tell because I'm not riding the different bikes back to back and so on. So it's, you know, confirmation bias and all that. But there are some cases where I do feel that. But for the most of the trail, I don't feel like it's easier for me to ride how I'm trying to ride or do what I'm trying to do. It is of course the case that this bike feels lighter, like you're like moving it around and so on. It feels lighter. There's absolutely no question of that. That's hard to say, you know, how much does that matter? It's going to be you know, a matter of preference and how much you care about that, but that's certainly a difference that's very, very obvious. This definitely, you know, when people say that, oh, if the KTM 890 or 790 feels more like a dirt bike or like a big dirt bike, it is definitely true. It doesn't actually feel like a dirt bike. It is still bigger and heavier than an actual dirt bike, but, you know, there's a very tangible, clear difference. Now, but it's not... Even the suspension, I think sometimes if I'm going over particularly bumpy stuff, maybe I'm noticing the difference, but it's a little hard to tell because with the 1300 I've never had any issue. I mean, it's more comfortable than this, even going off-road, but comfortable doesn't mean that it's better in terms of the capability of going off-road. The suspension, like on the 1300, because of the center stand, it's clattering around when you're running into bumps and stuff, which makes it feel less refined. This one clatters around a little bit less, so like that silent sort of suspension, bumping, it makes it feel smoother, but I think it's mostly that it's not rattling. I don't know exactly how much better the actual suspension feels to me. Again, to me, right? A sufficiently experienced rider is, I'm sure, going to disagree and say that even in like they can tell what the difference is, you know. So I'm not, this is not me disagreeing with an experienced rider that has a different experience, or even other people that are newbies. I'm just giving you my sort of subjective experience, right? Nothing here is meant to be sort of objective fact or anything like that. It's giving you a data point, a subjective data point. So that's kind of where I am. So from my personal perspective, right now at my current skill level and way of riding, if I wanted to give the strongest argument to get such a bike like this, I'm disregarding street performance, right? Just off-road. Pretend that I'm helicoptering in to the trail and I'm just riding off-road. The strongest argument would actually be the ability to go to ride single track, which aside from, you know, very simple single track at like a practice area, I haven't been riding single track on the 1300 GS, and generally speaking I wouldn't feel very comfortable attempting single track because you don't know, you might arrive at locations where the boxer engine is just, yeah, you just can't get through, right? It's just not wide enough, right? So that's a problem in terms of just being able to get through. Now, of course, the flip side of it is that the boxer engine is really nice in terms of picking the bike up. It makes it easier. But that would be like, if I wanted to say, okay, what would be the reason for me to have a bike like this instead of the 1300 GS at my skill level off-road, that would be the strongest argument. Now, I like the 1300 so much, especially on the street, and I still like it. I really like the feel of riding it off-road. I have no issue with it. I actually really love it. So I don't have a strong reason to change or switch or something like that necessarily. Because it's so much better on the street, there is so much less maintenance with the shaft drive and forged enduro wheels instead of the spoked wheels. So at the moment, I like, it's basically that single track / very deep rut type of circumstance where it would make the biggest difference to me. I haven't yet dropped this bike. Hopefully I won't drop it. So I might actually lay her down super carefully just to try it. before I get out of here, just because I want to feel what it's like. We'll see if I do that or not. I want to not damage it in any way, of course. I forgot my train of thought, but that is of course a benefit of this bike, right? Even though I haven't tried it yet, it's quite obvious that this is going to be easier to pick up. Aside from reviews and stuff like that, it's kind of obvious that it's going to be easier to deal with than a 1300. So I think that sort of summarizes it for off-road. We'll see if what else I think of as we go along here. I will say, the other way that this is actually a little bit more finicky, and I think this may not be true of the 890, from what I know. I have ridden one briefly, an 890 Adventure R Rally at a dealer demo or test ride, but the 790, which has a different engine and so on, it's a bit finicky with RPMs compared to the GS, right? So it wants to have high RPM. It is easier to stall it accidentally, I would say, although it's possible that that's just me not being used to it, but I do feel like it is easier to stall overall than the 1300. So that could be construed as a downside in comparison. But again, like, it's not like it's a big deal. Like, I got used to it pretty quickly, and again, I still think that it is easier to stall. So like, I'm riding differently, I'm deciding to shift differently, and making different choices as a result of that. But it's not a big deal or anything. It's just something to be aware of. Hopefully, I'll get to try the 890 and compare off-road. The difficulty, of course, is you need to be able to rent one. So this is rider share, which is allowing one that's allowing off-road for what it's worth, by the way, in case anybody is reacting to that. Owners can sort of specify whether off-roading is okay, and I was also super upfront about my plans when I rented the bike, so I'm not doing anything here that I'm not supposed to.
And speaking of rider share and this bike, if you are in the LA area and you have an interest in trying this particular bike out, I'm going to link to the rider share advert for the bike in the description. Please note that there's no affiliation, there's no sponsorship, there's no deal here. I just asked the owner when I handed the bike back, hey, do you want me to send a link? I recorded some footage, and he said yes, so that's what I'm going to do.
But it's not like these grow on trees, right? So there's one 890 Adventure R in my area, which wasn't available because the owner was going on a BDR, so I ended up with a 790. So we'll see if I'm able to try the 890. I don't have any concrete plans to get another bike, but I'm still sort of investigating what might be a good opportunity in the future. And one bike that I'm actually interested in is the 901, the Norden 901 Expedition, because it's supposed to have the same suspension as the 890 Adventure R, just tuned slightly differently, allegedly. But it's also, and it comes, with a nice fixed skid plate by default instead of having to deal with third party and all that. And it's supposed to be reasonably comfortable for a long distance. So this bike is, I rode yesterday. It was like 2-3 hours each direction. Obviously much less comfortable than the 1300. No doubt about that. So definitely not comfortable, right? But it wasn't mega bad. Like, I can imagine if I grew my skills to the point where, okay, I really want this bike or an 890. I can imagine getting to the point where, yeah, okay, it's an okay trade-off. It's bad, but it's not so bad that it's not doable. I can imagine having it. But from what I've seen of the reviews and information about the Norden Expedition specifically, it should be similarly good to this one off-road, but just significantly better going back and forth. So I'm not going to be turning into Chris Birch anytime soon. So I sort of suspect that the 901 Norden Expedition would actually be a kind of optimal for me for the foreseeable future. The one caveat is that I test sat one at a dealer, and for some reason I'm on the heavy side, but the rear shock I could bottom it just by sitting on it and sort of somewhat gently rocking a little bit, which was super surprising to me, given the expectation of that suspension. I'm hoping that's just because it was tuned maximally soft from the dealer, or sorry, from the factory, or the dealer did that potentially, as opposed to being reflective of like a bigger difference in the suspension than reviews are talking about. Because if I look at the 890R, the Adventure R, definitely nowhere close to that. Same with this one. Like if I sit on this and I try to bottom it, like try hard, like jumping on the, not jumping, but like, you know, humping the seat as hard as I can, so to speak, I'm not bottoming it, right? And I haven't bottomed it going over anything on the trail either. So hopefully that's just, like I said, and it's not actually indicative that the suspension is that much softer. Like hopefully it's all within the tuning range, so I can get it to feel much more similar to the Adventure R. I'm not able to try the 2019 790. Doesn't have the same electronics with the super adjustable off-road traction control and stuff like that. It basically seems to, I mean, I haven't super investigated, maybe it's hidden somewhere and I didn't find it, but from what I can tell superficially, I just didn't have the patience to look it up just for the couple of days that I'm going to have this bike. But it doesn't seem to have more than sort of a basic off-road street rally kind of setting, as opposed to the 1 through 9 kind of aggressiveness of traction control setting that the Norden 901 Expedition and the 890 Adventure R has nowadays. You can hear the engine there, perhaps. That's me being a little bit not used, still not fully used to how to avoid stalling this one. So I'm kind of high RPM to just avoid stalling it in that corner. I do like that it feels light. I'm not going to pretend that I don't like it, right? So if I could have everything about the 1300, except the boxer engine, you know, like everything else, but the boxer engine isn't in the way and it felt as light as this, obviously I would prefer this, right? But it's not that sort of, for me personally, it's not that like, oh my god, this is so nice, blah blah blah, like I really want this. That's not the case. I was kind of wondering whether maybe I would have that reaction, right? Because I do know that there's a huge difference. I've been riding the 300 KLX or KLX 300R in the past, right? So I know that there's a huge difference, but I didn't know what I was going to feel like now, but after I've had a bunch more experience and so on. So there was a possibility that I was going to have that kind of reaction and be like immediately, oh my god, I need to get this, I love the 1300, but this is so much better, blah blah blah. And for me that wasn't the case, right? That's basically the point here. Fewer people on the trail today than yesterday. This is a Sunday. I think, if I remember correctly, that may match past experiences. I think I've come Saturdays more often than Sundays, and I think the Saturdays are a little bit more populated with people. It's a popular trail, I think, because it's, I'm guessing because it's quite close to a lot of sort of the LA area. So, like, it's very close to fairly densely populated area. So there's just a lot of people for whom this is like a really decent and close trail. Whew. And the suspension, I can kind of comfortably sit as long as the terrain is reasonable. Of course, it is firmer and firmer seat and stiffer suspension feeling than the 1300. At least the 1300 in the default suspension firmness. I actually haven't tuned it to be firmer, which you can do in the off-road mode, because I haven't had a need. Like, I've never bottomed it out, and it's just comfortable. So I haven't done that. And like I said, I'm not jumping things around. But even with the seat and the firmer suspension, I can still quite comfortably sit for a lot of this, if I so choose, which I do, because again, standing from beginning to end is exercising a lot of my, that gets tiring for my back in particular, and so on. Still getting slowly more and more used to that, standing a lot, but I'm definitely not at the point where I'm just standing for an hour going up and down and not sitting at all. That would be too much for me. That's as close as I tend to get to jumping it. I get close to weightless, but I'm not actually jumping it, and I'm not really trying to at this point. I want to be careful. On the dirt bike, on MX tracks, I would get a little bit of air, like I wouldn't do the proper jumps, but I would get a little bit of air when I'm cresting, just to get a feel for it. But on a trail like this, especially, so going solo and whatever, I don't want to be pushing anything even remotely beyond skill, my skill level. Okay, here we go. I'm gonna stop for a moment, get some water, take a little bit of break, and then continue. Gotta go over the Moguls right there, which is one of the areas where I do feel like this is noticeably simpler or easier to ride than the 1300. and you'll see what I'm talking about if you haven't seen this before. Alright, these are the Moguls, rollers, whatever they're supposed to be called. If you have an opinion on what they're colloquially called, tell me, because they're not really whoops. These are ones that do feel a little easier on this bike than the 1300. By the way, if you're looking at this from a trail perspective, that's optional, you can just bypass it. It's just a fun little section. That's an example where I do feel like there's a tangible difference and it's tangibly easier to negotiate on this bike. But we'll see, and that could be it could be a matter of me having grown my skill set a little bit since I took that last. Once again, it's not a back-to-back comparison. It's been a few weeks or whatever. I forget exactly when, but it's been a few weeks, I think, since I rode this on the 1300. There's a similar kind of mogul situation at an incline at the very top of Santiago Peak, and same thing there. But I'm super curious once I get my 1300 back so I can use it, how it's gonna feel if I go back here with it. So compare after I've done it on the 890. And I think I'm gonna zip tie or tape my center stand just to remove that like psychological aspect of things like rattling and it feels worse, so I can get more of like a clear feel. It's possible that it's one of those things, you know, with headphones, if you go from really bad headphones to really good headphones, sometimes it can feel like, yeah, they're a little bit better, but it's not a big deal. And then when you then go back to the bad headphones, you're like, oh wow, this is bad. That's a thing. I don't know if it's like going to be like that with a bike, with off-roading on a bike. It might be. We'll see. I'll definitely make an update. When I am able, talking about how it feels to get back on it. Ooh. Not a very off-roady vehicle in front here. You're being a little brave. Thank you. Normally I stop here at this radio tower, whatever, mast, something. This time I am going to just proceed. Most of these sections that are after the little midpoint, aside from the stuff that I just went through, which was kind of rocky, that's kind of the most difficult portion. A lot of the rest of this up to Santiago Peak isn't necessarily more difficult than the bottom side of this trail. On the off chance that you've seen me talk about this trail before, I'm repeating myself, but hey, I'm guessing most people aren't watching me go down this trail end to end multiple times. So I'm assuming most people who might be listening haven't seen that before. The 5 of you, or whatever it ends up being, that actually watch this far into the video. One thing I don't like on this bike, by the way, because it's not, I mean, that's fixable, it's not a problem with the bike, it's just this particular bike, it's not my bike, right? So the rear brake lever is just not high enough, and or the foot pegs aren't low enough. So it's super hard to reach the rear brake when standing. So it feels like I have to put my foot down in hell or something to apply the brake. So on this bike I have been relaxing my usual stance. Oh, cybertruck. My usual stance of forcing myself to primarily use only the rear brake for practice. I do it a little bit, but like, it's just annoying because it's so hard to reach. Like, yeah, I kind of need to, like, I have the angle that I need my foot in is such that in order to reach it and actually apply enough brake to lock the rear, I am having to like crouch down and bend my knee a ton. Not the best situation. But once again, that's not some inherent problem with the bike. You know, whatever. If this were my bike, I would have just adjusted it, and I would have had whatever foot pegs and adjusted the position of the lever and all that. It's clearly set to be suitable for sitting. I think that it's actually the first time I've seen a cybertruck on the trails. I've been seeing them around LA fairly often, since they're pretty common now, but yeah, not on the trails here. Too much standing for my ankles. Gotta sit for a little bit. But as you can see, this is fairly rocky. I can still reasonably sit with the suspension, with the seat. Not that these are big bumps, but they're, you know, it's very vibrating, but it's still fine. Not that it would be comfortable for like 2 hours, but for a few minutes, it's fine. Try not to hit anything. I don't want to bend the wheel here on a rental. Let him go first, okay. He's being nice. He or she. Getting better at starting in uphills. That used to be, that would have been sort of, I don't know, 3 months ago, that would have been a little bit of a challenge for me to do properly. Without stalling or something like that. Okay, after these rocks, we're gonna get to those Moguls, rollers, whatever, that I feel are probably the most, it's a very optional thing, you just don't have to go down here, but kind of the most difficult parts of the trail. here at the very end. Especially the very first time, if you haven't gone through those. I remember it being shaky, and then the second time it was significantly easier. All right. Ooh. Time for a break. Alright, this can be a little harder to get back up than going down. Should be fine though. There we go. Yeah, okay. Oh, another difference between the 1300 and the 790 for off-road is that the quick shifter is a lot smoother for, at low gears, right? So 1 to 2 and a little bit 2 to 3. So in terms of standing, right, when I'm shifting on the 1300 standing, I use the clutch. I found it hard to do it with just a quick shifter, presumably because of the angle, and it's probably not pulling up as much and there's too much resistance. Whereas with this bike I find it easy. I can go from 1 to 2 or first to second gear without clutching easily when standing. Thank you. came back, or it's a different cybertruck. I don't know. Probably came back. It's a bit off camber there. I always end up taking it carefully wide. I should force myself not to. Just pretend that there's oncoming traffic. Just for practice. It's just when you have like the off camber turns in the wrong direction, so to speak, it's you just want to take the outside of the turn. And there we go. All right. Let's see. Is this gonna be when I drop it? No, doesn't look like it. Okay, brief break, brief break. All right, brief water break. Let's continue down. Yeah, rear sliding, like I said, hard to reach that lever. Thank you. Thank you. I'm still riding with just a visor, by the way, as opposed to goggles. I've had one case where I got a little bit of dust in my eyes for a brief moment, but overall I haven't found that there's a problem for me, so until it becomes an issue, I'm just going to keep doing visors. It's just so much more convenient. Goggles are a little bit of an annoyance for me, so I'm not going to switch just because it's the thing you're supposed to do. I'm just going to wait and see if there's ever a real problem. I'm I'm sure it matters depending on the helmet. I'm on a Klim Cryos Pro at the moment. Maybe some visors are gonna seal better than others, but you know, with dust hanging in the air, it's not like anything is airtight here, so the visor is just gonna help for things that are coming right at you, so to speak. back on the pavement. Mostly. That guy was going fast. Not that I'm going super slowly myself, but I feel like that was a little bit... Might have been like 40 or something is my guess. Alright, we're almost at the end of the trail. Might end the video here, I think. Ooh. Whew. Or maybe not. So if you're hearing this, I guess I decided to keep it. I'm gonna do a careful... I'm gonna layer down really carefully here. Just want to see how easily you can pick this one up. I never dropped it, which I was obviously not exactly trying to do. So that's good, but I have all the talk about how easy these are and the low center of gravity and everything. I do want to feel what that's like. And you know, it's not like this hasn't gone down a bunch of times. So, and I'm not gonna, you know, I'm telling the owner that and so on. It's not like I'm doing it on the down low. We already talked about the fact that it could get dropped and stuff like that. So obviously that's always the case when you're going on trails. So let's see. Very carefully. Okay. Whew. All right. Yeah. It's pretty decent, but less of a difference than I had imagined. Like if I compare it with I'm gonna be cleaning that, by the way, before I give it back. If I compare it with the 1300 GS, It might have been a little easier, but at least on this flat ground type of situation, with the boxer and the angle and so on, if it's easier, it's not that much easier, to be perfectly honest, so that's interesting. I was sort of hoping that it might be sort of very significantly easier, which would be helpful. Okay.